The elevator doors were already closing. Ziven moved anyway. He slipped through the gap sideways, one hand pressed flat against the metal frame, the other braced against his stomach. Not thinking, just moving. Because standing still in the lobby of Crestholm Tower had started to feel like standing in a room where nobody wanted him there, and he had learned a long time ago that the worst thing a person could do was stand still in a place that was trying to push him out. The doors sealed shut behind him. He exhaled. The elevator hummed. And then he felt it. Not a sound. Not a movement. Just a shift in the air. The kind of shift that happens when a room changes, when the atmosphere tips sideways without warning, when your body catches something your eyes haven't found yet. Ziven turned his head slowly. The man was already looking at him. He stood against the far wall of the elevator, arms folded. Still. Not the kind of still that meant relaxed. The other kind. The kind that meant controlled. The kind that said every single thing inside this man had been deliberately locked down, and it was taking effort, and he was very aware of that effort right now. He was tall. Dark suit. No tie. The top button of his collar opened just enough to look like it hadn't been planned. But Ziven had grown up around people who spent a great deal of money on things that were supposed to look unplanned. Nothing about this man was accidental. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were darker than the lobby marble, and they were locked on Ziven like he was the only thing worth looking at in the entire building. Ziven's pulse did something it had no business doing. He shifted his weight and looked straight ahead at the elevator panel. Floor 32 was already lit. He didn't push another button. He'd figure out the right floor later. He'd taken the wrong elevator, he knew that now. The directory in the lobby had listed the North Tower for Meridian Health Associates, and this was clearly the South Tower, but the door had been open and his back had been aching since morning, and the idea of walking all the way back around to find the correct bank of elevators had felt like too much for a Tuesday. He was 26 weeks along. Everything felt like too much lately. He kept his chin up, kept his breathing steady. He was very good at looking composed. He'd been doing it since he was old enough to understand that showing weakness in certain rooms had consequences. HI viewers, have you ever walked into the wrong place at exactly the right moment and felt like maybe it wasn't actually a mistake? The elevator climbed. Floor 7. Floor 12. The man hadn't moved, hadn't looked away. Ziven could feel it without turning. That specific pressure of being watched by someone who wasn't trying to hide the fact that they were watching. No pretense. No looking away and pretending. Just looking. Like Ziven was something he was trying to figure out. It should have been uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. But underneath the discomfort was something else. Something that didn't have a name yet. The floor numbers ticked upward. The elevator hummed. The silence between them stretched. Ziven shifted his weight again, one hand resting against the curve of his belly. A habit, not a gesture. Something he did without thinking. Something that had become as natural as breathing over the last few months. And that was when he noticed it. His body had been reacting since the moment he stepped through those doors. Not his mind. His mind was still running through its usual checklist. Wrong floor, wrong tower, sore back. Appointment in 40 minutes. His mind was occupied. But his body had already decided something. His heartbeat had changed. Not sped up exactly. Shifted. Adjusted. Like a compass needle swinging toward magnetic north without asking permission first. And the man across from him, still silent, watching, hadn't moved a muscle. He was just standing there with his arms folded. And then, slowly, without a word, he unfolded them. The arms came down. That was all. No step forward. No sound. Just the slow, deliberate movement of a man uncrossing his arms like a decision had been made that he hadn't put into words yet. Ziven felt his throat tighten. He turned to look at the floor numbers instead. Floor 17. Floor 19. Okay, fine. He knew how to do this. He had been navigating spaces where he wasn't supposed to exist for most of his adult life. Elite offices, high-floor lobbies, Rooms where people took one look at his face and started doing the math on who he was and whether he belonged. He had learned early that confidence was a coat you could put on even when you were cold. Especially when you were cold. He turned. Looked straight at the man. Smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic one. The kind of smile that said he'd noticed the staring, found it mildly entertaining, and had absolutely zero intention of pretending otherwise. Then, because Zivan Calloway had never once in his life done the cautious thing when the reckless thing was more interesting, he raised his hand, pressed 2 fingers to his lips, and blew a kiss. Slow, deliberate, ice steady. The elevator kept climbing. The man went very still, not startled. Something else. Like the gesture had landed somewhere deeper than intended, somewhere Zivan hadn't aimed for, and the man was now deciding what to do with that. 1 second. 2. Then he stepped forward. Not aggressive. Not rushed. The way a tide moves, certain of where it's going, not in any hurry to prove it. Zivan held his ground, which was impressive, he thought, considering the entire back of his neck had gone electric. The man stopped about 2 feet away, close enough that Zivan could see the detail in his face now, the slight tension at the corner of his jaw, the way his eyes moved, the way they took in Zivan completely and then settled. Just settled. Like they'd found what they were looking for and were in no rush to look away. Careful, Zivan said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Good. The man tilted his head. Just barely. You don't know what you're doing. His voice was low. Not a whisper. Not a warning exactly. The tone of a person stating a fact. Calmly, without cruelty. The way you might tell someone the road ahead was flooded. Zivan raised an eyebrow. I was blowing a kiss. Pretty sure I know how that works. Something moved behind the man's eyes. Not amusement. Deeper than that. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? A pause. Not hesitation. He wasn't a man who hesitated. This was the kind of pause that happened before something that couldn't be taken back. You don't know what you are to me. The sentence landed in the elevator like a stone dropped into still water. Zivan blinked. His mouth stayed in the smile, the practiced, composed, nothing touches me smile. But behind his ribs something had shifted. Hard. Quick. He hadn't expected that sentence. He hadn't been prepared for it. And the man seemed to know it. Not smug about it. Not pressing. He took one more look at Zivan. Eyes moving just slightly, like reading something written in a language he'd only just remembered he knew, and then stepped back. 1 step. Just enough. But his eyes didn't leave. And Zivan, standing in the center of an elevator that smelled like cedar and cold air and something he couldn't name, realized 2 things at once. First, he was not as composed as he thought he was. Second, the man had stopped himself. Deliberately. Intentionally. Like he'd been about to do something and had pulled himself back at the last moment. Not because he didn't want to. The opposite. Because he wanted to too much and he knew it, and that knowledge was the only thing keeping him on his side of the elevator. Zivan watched him. The man stood there, hands at his sides, eyes still and dark and entirely focused on Zivan's face. And then, barely visible, barely there, he leaned forward, just an inch, and stopped. The number above the door flashed. Floor 24. And then the elevator stopped moving. Not slowed. Not reached a floor. Stopped mid-climb between floors with a sound like a held breath and then nothing. The display flickered once. Twice. Then locked on the number. No chime. No announcement. Just stillness. Zivan looked at the panel. The emergency button was a small red circle behind a plastic cover. He looked at the door. Sealed. He looked up at the ceiling light, which had gone from white to a faint amber, the kind of shift that meant backup power had kicked in somewhere. Okay, he said. His voice was calm. His pulse was not. He turned to look at the man, who had not moved, who had not, in fact, reacted at all. He was standing in exactly the same position, same stillness, eyes on Ziven. Not alarmed. Not confused. Not even mildly inconvenienced. Which was wrong. Because most people, when an elevator stops unexpectedly between floors in a building, they clearly own the energy of do something. They check their phone. They exhale. They press a button. They say something like, power surge, or happens sometimes, or literally anything. This man said nothing. He just stood there like the stoppage was a development he had already accounted for. Ziven's eyes narrowed. You're not surprised. The man looked at him. No, just that. One word. And then the quiet rushed back in. Ziven turned it over in his head. The elevator had stopped. The man wasn't surprised. The lobby had been emptier than it should have been for this size of building. The security desk had waved him through without scanning his card, and now, thinking back on it, that was strange too. He'd assumed it was a broken reader. He'd assumed a lot of things today that were starting to feel like they needed examining. What is this building? Ziven asked. Crest Home South. I know the name. I mean, what does it do? Who works here? Private holdings. Asset management. A pause. Certain acquisitions. What kind of acquisitions? The kind that don't advertise. Ziven's jaw tightened. He crossed his arms, and then uncrossed them immediately because his stomach had gotten to the size where crossing his arms had stopped being comfortable. Which was embarrassing. Which he refused to be embarrassed about. He put one hand on his hip instead. So this is a private corporate building. Yes. And I walked in. Yes. Without clearance. The man's eyes moved. Down just briefly to the hand Ziven had placed at his hip. Then back up. That, he said carefully, is what concerns me. There it was. Not the flirting. Not the tension. Not whatever was still humming in the air between them like a frequency neither of them could turn off. What concerned this man, this controlled, still clearly important person, was that Ziven had entered at all, which meant the building should have kept him out, which meant it hadn't, which meant something about Ziven had cleared a barrier it shouldn't have been able to clear. He felt the realization move through him like a cold hand pressed flat against his spine. And then the speakers in the elevator ceiling crackled. A voice came through, flat, automated, neither male nor female. All three signals confirmed. 1 beat. 2. The man's expression didn't change. But his eyes did. The doors opened, not onto a floor, onto a corridor wide, low-lit, the kind of institutional quiet that lived inside buildings that ran on systems most people never saw. No windows, no waiting area, just clean gray walls and a floor that reflected light like still water. Ziven stepped forward instinctively and then stopped, because there were 2 men standing in the corridor. And they looked like the man behind him. Not similar. The same. Same height. Same face. Same jaw, same eyes, same particular set to the shoulders that Ziven had spent the last several minutes cataloging without realizing he was cataloging it. 2 suits, 1 charcoal, 1 deep navy, but the same face, the same presence. Identical. They were already looking at him. Both of them. Not scanning him, not evaluating him the way strangers look at someone unexpected. Something else. The way you look at something you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. Recognition without understanding. A jolt that moved through all 3 of them at once, because Ziven felt it too. A wave of something that hit him square in the chest and forced a breath out of him he hadn't planned on releasing. Nobody spoke. The one in charcoal, the second one, stood with his hands clasped in front of him. His eyes moved quickly. Ziven could see his mind working from across the corridor, taking in data, running calculations, processing. This one was a thinker. Everything he looked at, he measured. The one in navy, the third, stood very still. Not the controlled stillness of the first one, the man from the elevator. This was different, quieter. The kind of stillness that came from someone who felt things very deeply and had learned very carefully how not to let it show except in moments that mattered. He was looking at Zivan the way you'd look at something that had answered a question you hadn't finished asking. They didn't speak to each other. Didn't exchange glances. Didn't need to. Something passed between all three of them, the two in the corridor and the one behind Zivan, that had no sound and no gesture. Just understanding. Immediate and complete. Zivan's neck prickled. "Okay," he said. "I'm going to need someone to start talking." The one in charcoal, the analytical one, tilted his head. "How did you enter the building?" Not a question. A beginning. "The front door," Zivan said. "The front door requires a level 4 biometric clearance. It was open. It shouldn't have been. Well, it was." The one in navy took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Not fast. The way you approach something you need to see better, gently, with intent. His eyes dropped, just for a second, to Zivan's stomach, and he went completely still. Not startled still. Not alarmed still. The specific, terrible stillness of a person whose entire world has just shifted 3 inches to the left, and they are standing in the space between understanding it and responding to it. Zivan watched him. "What?" Zivan said carefully. "Are you looking at?" The man in navy raised his eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it, then quietly, so quietly it almost didn't make it across the corridor. "Ours." Nobody grabbed him. That was the first thing Zivan clocked as the seconds stretched out in that corridor. No hand on his arm. No blocking his exit. No one moved to stand between him and the elevator doors, which were still open behind him. Technically, he could turn around right now, step back in, go to whatever floor he'd been trying to reach before this entire day had decided to become something unrecognizable. Technically, but his legs weren't moving. He told himself it was because he needed answers. That was reasonable. That made sense. A stranger had just looked at his unborn child and said a word that had no right to mean what it sounded like it meant, and standing here waiting for an explanation was the logical thing to do. That was what he told himself. The one from the elevator, the first one, the one who had unfolded his arms and stepped closer and said things that still hadn't finished landing, moved to his left. Not behind him, not ahead of him, to the side, just close enough. The charcoal one moved to the other side. The navy one stayed where he was, ahead, a few feet back, watching. And Zivan was aware, with a sudden and precise clarity, that he was in the center of a formation. Not a cage, not a trap, something else. 3 points around a center, like protection. He walked, not because they told him to, because the navy one turned slightly and moved down the corridor in a direction that had no visible threat, and every instinct in Zivan's body, which had been sending him signals all morning that his brain had been too busy to listen to, said that moving forward was safer than staying still. His feet followed. He hated that his feet followed. They moved through the corridor and then through a set of doors that opened without anyone touching a panel. The room beyond was large and quiet. A conference room, but softened somehow. Less sterile than the corridor. Dark furniture. Low light. A long table with chairs that had been pushed aside. The space more open than closed. The charcoal one, the analytical one, stopped at the table and turned to face Zivan fully. "You're not injured," he said. "No. You're 20-something weeks along. 26. A flicker. Something in his eyes recalculated. "And you came into this building because—" "Wrong elevator." Zivan met his gaze. "I was looking for Meridian Health Associates. North Tower. I went through the wrong door." The analytical one looked at the first one. A look that said, "You see what I'm seeing." The first one gave the smallest nod. "You couldn't have gone through the wrong door," the analytical one said. "This tower's entry scanner would have rejected your credentials before the lobby door unlocked. The door was unlocked when I got there. It shouldn't have been. You keep saying that." Zivan tilted his head. "And yet here I am." The Navy one spoke then. His voice was the quietest of the three, even unhurried, the kind of voice that never had to be loud because the quality of it was enough. Your presence in this building tripped a system alert. Ziven stilled. What kind of alert? A bond proximity alert. He paused. It went off on all three of our floors simultaneously. The room went quiet in a way that had weight. Ziven looked at each of them in turn. The first one controlled, watching. The charcoal one, calculating, waiting for his reaction. The navy one, still, but this time his stillness had a different texture. Careful. Careful in the way of someone who knew how much this information cost and was watching to make sure it landed right. He was in a building he should not have been able to enter. A system he had never heard of had flagged his presence. Three men who shared one face had all been alerted at once. And somewhere in the last few minutes, one of them had looked at his stomach and said a word that Ziven was very deliberately not thinking about, because thinking about it would mean following the thought to its end, and he was not ready for where that thought ended. He kept his face even. "So what does that mean for me?" he said. The first one, the elevator man, the one whose arms coming down had started all of this, looked at him with those dark, still eyes. "It means," he said, "that you shouldn't have been able to enter this building. A beat. And we need to understand how you did." Ziven said nothing, because underneath that sentence, underneath the factual, controlled delivery of it, was something else. A layer that the words were sitting on top of. A tension that the three of them were carrying in their bodies like a held note. They weren't asking how he had entered the building because they were threatened. They were asking because they already knew the answer. And the answer changed everything. What would you have done? Blew the kiss or kept your eyes forward? Drop it in the comments. Who was the father? The question came from the charcoal one. Ziven's name was Demarian. That was what the charcoal one had introduced himself as, quietly, without ceremony. After Ziven had sat down and made it clear he wasn't moving until someone started making sense. Demarian Voss. The one from the elevator was Cassius. The navy one was Rain. 3 names. 1 face. And a question now sitting in the middle of the room that Ziven had not prepared for. He looked at Demarian. "That's not your business." "It might be." "It's not." Demarian set both hands flat on the table. Not aggressive. The gesture of someone choosing patience as a strategy. "We're not trying to corner you," he said. "We're trying to understand what's happening. Because the system that flagged your entry, that system has not triggered in 11 years. Since it was installed." He paused. "It went off 3 times in the last 40 minutes. Once per floor. Simultaneous." Ziven stared at him. "And that means what?" "It means the signal it reads doesn't belong to you alone." The room went very quiet. Ziven set his jaw. He had built a very specific story about his life over the last 6 months. He had built it carefully, the way you build anything that needs to hold weight. Starting at the bottom, working up, not leaving gaps. The story was, he was alone. The story was, the person who had been there had left before he found out he was pregnant. The story was, he didn't have a name to give, not because he was protecting anyone, but because the last 3 weeks of the relationship had gone sideways in a way that still made no sense to him, and the person had simply stopped. Messages unanswered. Number disconnected. Like they'd stepped through a door and the door had closed behind them. And on Ziven's side there was nothing left but silence and a positive result on a test he'd taken alone on a Tuesday morning. He had decided somewhere around week 14 to stop pulling at that thread. Some things didn't owe you an explanation. You kept moving. That was the story. "I don't know who the father is," Ziven said. Demarian's eyes sharpened. "You don't know? Or you can't remember?" Ziven opened his mouth, and then stopped, because that was a strange way to ask that question. Not strange in a rude way. Strange in the way of someone who already had a shape in mind and was checking to see if the answer fit inside it. "What's the difference?" Zivan said slowly. There's a significant difference. Rain, the navy one, the quiet one, moved from his position near the wall. He came to sit across from Zivan, which none of them had done yet. He sat the way he did everything. Deliberately, like every motion was chosen. Do you have gaps? Rain said. In your memory. From around the time the pregnancy would have begun. The air in the room changed. Zivan felt it on his skin. He didn't answer right away. He looked at Rain's face. That face that was the same face as the other two, but worn differently, carried differently, like the same song played in a different key, and he thought about the question. He thought about October, how certain weeks of it were blurry in a way that the months before and after were not, how he'd chalked it up to stress, how there had been a period where he'd lost about 12 days of clarity, not blacked out, not incapacitated, just soft, edges rounded, like living slightly behind glass. He had never told anyone that, not because he'd hidden it, because it hadn't seemed like something that needed saying. There might be some gaps, he said, quietly. From around that time, Rain and Demarian and Cassius all looked at each other, and the look on their faces was not surprise. Cassius left the room. Just for a moment, to pull something from the anteroom off the corridor, he said. 2 minutes. And Zivan felt it the second he was gone. Not discomfort, not relief, a drop, like air pressure changing when a storm front moves in. The room lost something the moment Cassius stepped through that door, and Zivan's body registered it before his mind processed it, and that was wrong. That was the kind of thing that happened between people who had years of history, not 45 minutes in an elevator. He pressed his hand against his sternum, said nothing. Rain noticed. Of course Rain noticed. You felt that, Rain said. It wasn't a question. Zivan considered denying it. He was good at denying things, politely, cleanly, without leaving a loose end. But Rain was looking at him with that specific, careful attention that made denial feel like a waste of both their time. The room feels different, Zivan admitted. Yes, that's not normal. No, Rain said. It's not. Demarian was working quietly at the end of the table, a tablet, some kind of internal system, pulling data that Zivan could see from across the room was structured around biological readings. Not medical in the conventional sense. Something else. Something that had its own format, its own language. What are you running? Zivan asked. A bond profile comparison, Demarian said, without looking up. Cross-referencing your entry biometrics, which the lobby scanner recorded even though it let you through, against our genetic markers. You have my biometrics. The scanner took them when you walked in. Without my consent. The building has a passive intake system for all entrants. It's in the public disclosure filing for the tower. He looked up briefly. Most people don't read those. Zivan decided to be angry about that later. And what does the comparison show? Demarian set the tablet down on the table and turned it so Zivan could see the screen. He didn't fully understand the data. He wasn't supposed to. But the visual was clear enough, 3 waveforms and a 4th, smaller one. The 3 larger ones were steady, distinct, like individual signatures. The 4th was different. It moved between them, overlapped all 3, touched each one and held. That 4th one, Zivan said. Is you, Demarian said. Silence. And the small one inside it, a beat, is the child. Zivan looked at the screen for a long time. The small waveform, the one nested inside his own, was doing something none of the others did. It was pulling, reaching, almost, toward all 3 of the larger signatures in a way that looked less like data and more like something reaching out in the dark, looking for a hand to hold. Cassius came back through the door. The room changed again, pressure equalizing, something settling back into place. And Zivan watched his own body do it, watched himself exhale when Cassius walked in, watched the tension in his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, felt the shift before he had any explanation for it. He had not looked at Cassius. He had been looking at the screen. And still his body had known. This is important. This wasn't an ordinary bond forming. This was something that had already been laid. Like a foundation that had been poured months ago, before anyone had put up walls, before anyone had even chosen a floor plan. The bond is already present, Rain said. It isn't forming. It's stabilizing. Ziven looked at him. There's a difference. Yes. Rain held his gaze. Forming means beginning. Stabilizing means it was already there, and your body is finally close enough to the source to stop fighting what it already knows. Ziven sat with that. Let it move through him like cold water. If the bond stabilizes, he said, voice even. What does that mean? Rain looked at him carefully. It links all three of us to you, he said. Permanently. And to the child. The footage ran for 11 seconds. That was all. 11 seconds of lobby camera feed from a building 4 blocks east of Crest Home South. Timestamped 6 days ago. A figure in a gray coat, moving on the sidewalk. Walking at the pace of someone going somewhere. Looking to any passing eye, like everyone else on the street. Except they weren't looking at the street. They were looking at Ziven. Ziven, who had been walking to his 7:30 appointment that morning. Ziven, who had worn the gray coat because it was the warmest thing he owned that still fit over his stomach. Ziven, who had not noticed anyone watching him because why would he? He was just a person going to a prenatal checkup, not someone who needed to watch his back. Demarian paused the footage on the figure. This same signature shows up in camera pull from 3 other locations, he said. Over the past 11 days. Ziven stared at the screen. Same person. Same profile. The coat changes. The route changes. The position changes. Demarian advanced the footage to a second clip. Same coat, different angle. But the behavior doesn't. Observation pattern. No contact. No approach. Just tracking. Tracking me. Tracking your position. Pause on that. Because there was a difference. Someone tracking a person was one thing. Someone tracking a position, specifically the position of a pregnant Omega moving through a city, meant they weren't interested in what Ziven was doing. They were interested in where he was going to be. Why? Ziven said. Cassius, who had been standing near the door with his arms folded again, the stance he returned to when he was thinking hard, spoke. We don't believe the entry today was accidental, he said. We believe you were guided here. Ziven's head came up fast. Guided? By who? We don't have a name yet. We have a methodology. Cassius uncrossed his arms and moved to the table. He pulled up a third screen, a map, city grid with a route traced in amber. Your normal route to Meridian Health Associates uses a crosswalk on 5th. Today that crosswalk was blocked. Construction barriers appeared overnight. The detour the barriers created runs directly past the south entrance of this building. Ziven looked at the map. He had thought nothing of the barriers. Construction was everywhere in this district. He had turned left instead of right, cut through the side street, and found the entrance without thinking twice. The door had been open. He had gone in. That was how it had felt. But someone had made sure the door was open. Someone had cleared a path that ended at this building. And someone had been watching him for 11 days, calculating his movement, timing an outcome they had already decided on. They weren't trying to hurt me, Ziven said slowly. No, Cassius said. They were trying to get me here. Yes. To you. Cassius's jaw worked. To confirm the bond. If the 3 of us reacted to your presence, if the system triggered, that would be evidence. Evidence of what? Rain answered that one. Quietly. Carefully. The way he handled everything that carried weight. Evidence that you exist, Rain said. That someone with your bond profile is alive and present and carrying. He paused. There are people who have a significant interest in knowing that. People who have been waiting to know it. Zivan felt the temperature in the room drop. And are those people the ones who tracked me here? No, Rain said. A beat. The people who tracked you here were trying to protect you by ensuring you found us first. The footage was still running on the screen. The figure in gray, watching Zivan walk down a street on a Tuesday morning with no idea anyone was watching. They weren't trying to kill us, Demarian said. They were trying to confirm you. The room settled into silence. Zivan sat in the middle of it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a question was forming that had nothing to do with the footage or the map or the amber route traced across a city grid. It had to do with October, and the 12 days he couldn't clearly remember, and whether the person who had disappeared from his life without a word had disappeared, or had been made to disappear. You can leave, Cassius said it first. He said it standing near the door, arms at his sides, the door itself open behind him. Genuinely open, not a gesture, not a test. The corridor was visible beyond it. The elevator was at the end of the corridor. The lobby was below. Nobody was blocking anything. Zivan looked at the open door, then at Cassius, then at Demarian, who had closed the tablet and set it face down on the table in a way that meant, I'm done presenting information. Whatever happens now is yours. Then at Rain, who was watching him with those quiet, dark eyes and saying nothing at all, just waiting. You're serious, Zivan said. Yes, Cassius said. I know things now, about this building, about you three, about the bond. Yes, and you're just going to let me walk out. Cassius held his gaze. We're not going to let you do anything, he said. You're a person. You make your own choices. We're not interested in claiming someone who hasn't chosen us back. The sentence landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Somewhere behind Zivan's ribs that had already been taking too many hits today. He had spent a long time, longer than he would admit out loud, longer than was probably healthy, bracing for the moment when things went the wrong direction, when protection turned into control, when interest turned into possession. He had been raised in rooms where power dressed itself as care, and he had learned to read the moment when the door stopped being an option and became a decoration. This wasn't that. He could feel the difference. The door was open, truly open, and all three of them were standing at different points in the room, none of them between him and that exit, all of them radiating the particular, costly stillness of people who wanted something very much and had decided that wanting it didn't entitle them to it. That mattered. It mattered more than he'd expected it to. What happens? Zivan said. If I go, we'll secure you, Demarian said, from a distance. The threat that was tracking you doesn't disappear because you leave this building. We'd make sure you were safe without requiring anything from you in return. And the bond. A pause. Demarian and Cassius exchanged a look. Rain spoke. The bond doesn't reverse, he said. It's already present. Whether you stay or go, you'll feel the distance from us. It'll ease over time, but it won't disappear entirely. So I'll feel it either way. Yes. And the child. Rain's expression shifted. Not dramatically. A softening that moved across his face like light changing. The child will be healthy, he said. Regardless. Zivan stood up. He hadn't planned to. His body made the decision and his mind followed. The way things had been happening all day. Instinct first, reasoning second. Like something inside him had already recalibrated toward a different center of gravity and was done waiting for permission. He walked toward the door. His chest was tight. His pulse was loud. The pull, that specific, wordless pull that had started the moment the elevator doors closed, was working against him now, each step toward the exit costing something he didn't have a name for yet. He reached the doorway, stopped, stood there for a full 5 seconds with his hand on the frame and the corridor stretching out in front of him, and he thought about October and the 12 missing days, and the child that wasn't supposed to be possible for someone in his position, and a door that opened when it shouldn't have, and 3 men with the same face who had looked at him and reacted in a way that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with something ancient and real. He thought about being alone. He was so tired of being alone. "If I stay," he said, without turning around, "this changes everything, doesn't it?" The room behind him was quiet for a moment. Then Cassius's voice. Low, steady. The voice he'd used in the elevator when he said things he meant. "Yes," he said. "It does." Ziven stood in the doorway for one more breath. Then slowly, he turned around. He didn't announce it. There was no speech, no declaration. No moment where Ziven Calloway stood in the center of the room and said something that wrapped the decision in language it didn't need. He just turned around and came back inside. That was all. Demarian let out a breath he'd been holding since Ziven stood up. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet release, the kind that happens when a possibility you've been holding at a careful distance gets to become real. Cassius didn't move. But the line of his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, the way a person relaxes when the outcome they've been bracing against doesn't arrive. Rain looked at Ziven with something that could only be called relief. Not the loud kind. The kind that comes from deep in the chest. The kind that lives in the body and doesn't always make it to the face. Ziven sat back down. He clasped his hands on the table in front of him. Looked at all 3 of them. His face was still composed. Still wearing the collected, "Nothing reaches me" expression he'd been carrying since the elevator doors closed this morning. But underneath it, if you knew how to look, something had shifted. Something had come down. "I have conditions," he said. "Okay," Cassius said. "I'm not moving anywhere right now. I'm not making any permanent decisions right now. I stay in my apartment, I go to my appointments, I keep my routines. You don't disrupt my life. You work around it." "Understood," Demarian said. "And I get answers. Real ones. About October. About who was tracking me and why. About what this bond actually means for the child and what we're—" he paused. "What we're looking at going forward. No managing what I know. No deciding what I can handle." Rain nodded slowly. "No managing," he said. "You get everything." Ziven held his gaze. "I mean it. So do I." The room sat in that for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Something settling. The way a space feels when the right people are finally in it, and everyone knows it and nobody needs to say so out loud. Cassius moved to the table. Not to push anything further, just to be closer. To be in the same space. Ziven watched him come and didn't move away. Which was its own kind of answer. The threat that had tracked him across 11 days was still out there. The questions about October still didn't have clean answers. The bond was present but young, stabilizing but not settled, and 3 men who shared a face had gone from strangers to something without a word for it in the space of a single afternoon. None of that was resolved. But Ziven was here, and the child that had been reaching toward all 3 of them on Demarian's screen like something finding its way home in the dark, was here. And for the first time since October, since the silence, since the 12 missing days and the decision to stop pulling at threads that led nowhere, Ziven Calloway did not feel like he was standing in a room where nobody wanted him. He pressed one hand against his stomach. A habit. Except this time something answered. Not movement. Not a kick. Something quieter than that. A warmth. A pressure from the inside that felt less like biology and more like recognition. Like the child knew. Like the child had always known. Like the child had been the one all along, pulling the right doors open. Rain watched him. And when Ziven looked up and met his eyes, Rain said, quietly, "This isn't over." Not a warning. A beginning. Ziven looked at him. At all 3 of them. And for the first time today, he nodded. If the story moved you, if you felt Ziven's exhaustion, his courage, the weight of that turn back through the doorway, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments because your words inspire more people than you know. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. There are more stories coming to this channel. Stories about bonds that don't break, about choices that cost something real, about people who find their way back to something they didn't know they'd been missing. You do not want to miss what comes next.